When people in the Midlands want to talk, they talk to Will Faulkner.
Well, good morning. How's your Tuesday so far? Coming up today, don't take out your hosepipe just yet. That ban is still in place for some parts of the Midlands, but not for others. Why so many people don't want one of the largest credit unions in the country to be formed here in the Midlands, at least not yet. And it is decision day for people with Friedreich's ataxia, that rare condition for whom lives could be extended substantially if a new drug that happens to be very expensive is made available by the state. That decision from senior HSE management should be known at some point this morning. When you call, 0818 300 103 is my number. You can text, you can WhatsApp, 083 30 10 103, powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore. So let's see what's on the front pages. What should we be talking about today? Money, 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 money. Because the fun police, no, that's being unkind. The people who have been charged to call foul whenever the government overspends, the Independent Fiscal Advisory Council, they are concerned, legitimately, that budgets are running out of control, that we have not alone increased the voted spend, in other words, what was consciously done by the government, but overruns are expected to hit €2 billion this year alone. And we haven't managed to balance the books and come in on budget since 2013. That's the last time there was an underrun in the state spending. So that is highlighted in several newspapers today. Irish Independent, rampant public spending risks permanently higher cost of living. Because ultimately, the biggest cause of inflation in the state is the state itself, if we overspend. On the Irish Times, doctor who reviewed HSE scans was struck off abroad. This relates to outsourced scans, and it doesn't say in which part of the country these scans were taken. However, it does tell us that the company involved is Affiday Ireland, and ultrasounds in particular would have been the scans of choice that this consultant reviewed. He was working for this imaging company in 2024, but had his licence revoked by the Swedish medical regulator in June of 2023. And then the Norwegian regulator sometime thereafter. But Dr. Satar Kadem had moved to the UK and was reading scans and ultrasounds sent over from Ireland. So a lot more to be learned about who may be affected if his quality of work was not to standard. So we'll watch that space. The Irish Daily Mail, end the legal aid strike now. Pressure growing on Justice Minister to halt solicitors' dispute as mother of M9 joyrider says she pleaded for her son to be jailed, but the case was adjourned due to this row. And the row is that solicitors do not want to be paid a flat fee for cases when cases can vary enormously in their complexity. And then on the front of the tabloids today, the Star and the Mirror, couples murder suicide horror. Man's remains found on rocks. Coast Guard help recover body, it says. So that's a selection of the rather morbid stories on the front pages. I mentioned the M9 tragedies and the priest who was officiating at the fourth funeral for one of the 5 teenagers killed in that crash told the mourners what the boys did was wrong. He also said that the young man's family prayed for all those who were affected and injured. And so the funeral of the O'Brien cousin, Alex McCarthy, took place in the same church as Jeremy O'Brien, 18 years of age, from Carlow. It was the Holy Family Church in Asca. Big crowd turned out, and the priest, obviously in a difficult position, trying to strike the balance between not condoning their actions and being sympathetic to the innocent family involved. But he does say, death is not the final word. God, who gave us life, does not abandon us in death. Now, let's move on to some of the stories not on the front pages today. Locally, one of the best-known pubs in Athlone a few years ago was Murphy's Law. Very popular, good food, but ultimately, in 2022, following the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine then erupting and costs going through the roof, the then owners said they had to close. And 20 jobs were lost as a result of that. So, along comes a new businessman, Mohammed Riaz, and he wants to develop Murphy's Law into a casual dining establishment. However, the planners, in a 12-page report, have shot down his idea. They say they recognise that food and beverage uses can make a positive contribution to town centre activity, but they considered the proposed change of use to a takeaway would have contributed to an excessive concentration of takeaways and fast food outlets in the town centre. Is that really a problem in Athlone? Too many takeaways, too many cheap food outlets, not enough quality dining. I would have assumed there was enough for all. Now, are there too many vape shops or cheap camera shops and electronic shops and so on? Maybe. But you still have a fabulous, fabulous town centre core. Burgess Department Store, Golden Island Shopping Centre, Athlone Town Centre. Anyway, but in this case, the planners feel, no, we don't need one more. Do you agree? One of the great stains on our history was the way we treated the men of Jadoville, who, by all accounts, exemplified the very best of what a soldier should be, so much so that the tactics they used to fend off the militias that were coming at them in the Congo, that's been turned into a textbook for military academies all over the world. But because they were seen to surrender, and they did not technically surrender, by the way, they were absolutely pilloried when they came home and humiliated and mistreated. And anyway, we know now, with the benefit of more than 50 years, we did them wrong. 60 years, in fact. We did them a great disservice. So, what's happening? According to the Irish Independent, a new book by retired Lieutenant Colonel Dan Harvey outlines how these 156 troops have been in a battle for decades to restore their reputation, and how the Jadoville Service Award was granted only decades later after a huge battle, political battle, and it documents just what a struggle they went through, not on the battlefield, but after. And I think it's a wonderful read. And it gets a preview in the Irish Independent this morning, if you want to have a gander. Fiona Pender, we mentioned yesterday how the 30th anniversary of Fiona's disappearance was marked at the weekend, as once again the Remembrance Walk attracted a huge crowd to the Grand Canal, to the stretch known as Fiona's Way. Well, a retired detective, Alan Bailey, says to this day he still thinks of that case, and it is one of his great regrets that he couldn't solve it. And he said, we were satisfied at the end of our investigation that Fiona's disappearance was a murder. We recommended this in 2001. That was 5 years after she disappeared. 5 years later, it should have been upgraded to murder, he says, but it took 20 years until the Gardaí decided to do that. And so in the article today, again in the Irish Independent, he goes into some of the reasons why he thinks there was a reluctance to treat the case with the seriousness and the gravity that it deserved. So, let's move on to some other stories. Nationally, the number of people coming to Ireland has fallen this year. Immigration is down 12%. But still, 110,000 people moved here in the 12 months to April. And when you consider that we built somewhere in the region of 30,000 houses or less in a year, we're not really keeping pace with immigration, much less the number of natural births and natural population growth that we have here. So where are people coming from? Well, it looks like, in fact, quite a few come from Australia, the UK, America. Yes, Eastern Europe is very high on the list. But where do the Irish go? Because emigration has fallen for the second year in a row, but 62,500 people still left the state. So again, we're looking at Australia, albeit down 13% in the year, the US, Canada. We tend to stay to the very familiar trodden paths as Irish people. You'd have to go down to Dubai before you find anywhere exotic, and I imagine most of those are teachers. That's in the Irish Examiner this morning. The police in Nigeria have come across a very unusual case that has been highlighted in several papers worldwide, because you don't expect, when you reach 101 years of age, to be accused of drug dealing. But Esther Onganbo has been accused of just that after she was found with sachets of skunk, a strain of cannabis weighing 90 grams, which apparently she was selling to locals after her shop, which she had been running up until the age of 100, was burned down. And as a result, in order to make a living, she apparently turned to drug dealing. So she has been released on bail, according to news reports from Nigeria, and the state in which she is living intercepted a wooden boat last Friday, which transported drugs into her village, and that is how she was caught, it seems. And a final one for you. Gentlemen, we hear a lot about diets, and some might scoff and say, sure, it's only women who concern themselves with losing weight. Well, not so, according to a new survey in the Irish Examiner. 9 out of 10 men agree that you probably face a prejudice if you are overweight, and yet 1 in 3, fewer than 1 in 3, would talk to their doctor if they themselves needed to lose weight. 4 out of 10 men said they wouldn't really talk to anybody about their weight. So I think that is a stark difference. It doesn't give the figures for how many women would be willing to talk to their doctor or their friends, but it's something that I suspect ladies are far more open about. Why does the fragile male ego and that stubborn pride get in the way of so many health considerations? Asking for help seems to be the most difficult thing. Anyway, if you are somebody who wants to lose weight, there are any number of options now which your doctor can guide you with. It can be the weight loss jabs. It can be, if you're in a serious situation, that bariatric surgery. It can just be the old-fashioned diet and exercise approach and supplements and so on. So the Irish Examiner has a brilliant article about it today, and it's worth picking up. So, if you are on the move, if you're thinking, I don't like that boss I work for anymore, it's time to find a new boss. Let's see if one of these will be right for you.
Got a topic you want us to cover? Email Midlands today at midlands183.com.
Credit unions like to remind us that they are different from banks, and last week members of North Midlands Credit Union demonstrated one of those differences rather emphatically. They were asked to approve a merger with Roscommon Credit Union, and while a majority of those voting supported it, that majority wasn't enough. The proposal needed 75% support and didn't get it, so the members have effectively said no. That's despite North Midlands having successfully completed 6 previous transfers and its management believing this latest deal would strengthen the organisation. Derek Smith is the Chief Executive of North Midlands Credit Union. Derek, good morning.
Good morning, Will, and how are you?
So from your point of view, well, Why do this? What was being proposed, and why were you in favour?
I suppose it's the way that the sector has gone. Well, you've seen the number of credit unions dramatically decreased, because I suppose to compete with the banks, we really need to offer a wide range of services and increase the services our members are looking for. And to do that, you need scale. So the sector, with the support of the central bank and with the collaboration between the individual credit unions, made the decision to unify. I suppose credit unions are about communities, and we work together. In relation to TOEs and the history of North Midlands, we done our first TOE in 2014, and we've done six.
That's a term for mergers. It's a transfer of engagement.
Transfer engagement. Apologies. Transfer engagements, and we've done 6 since 2014, and they've all been successfully integrated to North Midlands Credit Union. And I think it has made us, a stronger, more robust organisation, more secure for our members, and able to offer more services to our members. So we think, it's a positive move. Each merger would have been considered.
What sort of scale would this have brought about had Roscommon been merged with North Midlands? Give us some numbers, whether it's asset value or membership.
Probably total assets of about 600 million. Loan book, possibly about 170 million. So you're talking a strong organisation.
Is there a risk when credit unions get too big, they move away from the community ethos, or at least it's harder to connect with that because of scale?
I personally wouldn't think so. I think you're preserving the credit union within the area in a lot of cases, because the smaller entity may not be able to exist. It may not be able to continue with the increasing regulations and the competition out there. So I really don't think that is the case. Credit unions will always be first and foremost about their members, and by having your office in the community and offering the services, your doors are open in a lot of branches six days a week, and you're offering front of house service and online services. So I don't think that is the case, to be honest.
So were other concerns mentioned to you by members in advance of the vote?
No, by and large, you can see the vast majority. It was 75%. It's a very high threshold. 70% was what was achieved. By and large, members don't engage hugely at SGMs or AGMs with the numbers we have, because they're probably satisfied with the service. So there was nothing really different about this TOE, or transfer of engagement. We would have seen it as a positive, and no negative connotations that we would have foreseen.
So, for instance, were there guarantees around staff retention, branch retention, things like that, which will matter to members?
Absolutely. Before you get to an SGM, all those things are earned out in relation to branch retention and staffing. Like we would have met with the Roscommon staff on a number of occasions, to reassure them about coming to North Midlands. Our own staff would have been aware of the transfer engagement process, and we would have good engagement with the staff. So no obvious concerns.
So does this result kill the proposal completely, or can you now consult, hear what the concerns might be, and if it's possible, allay them or indeed modify plans to reflect them?
Well, I suppose after every project, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, you would have to review it. We would have to respect there has been a democratic vote, and we'd have to consider why. We will look at maybe why it didn't achieve the majority, and North Midlands will have to consider whether to proceed or to look at it in the future, and Roscommon will have to look at it, and I'm sure the central bank will have to consider it too. We just have to consider it, and hopefully it may be revisited, but at this point in time, we just have to consider everything.
Something that is a technical point but worth mentioning is when we say 75% of members, it's not of the total membership, but of those who will come to the special meetings to vote. How representative is that really?
Unfortunately, and that's an issue for credit unions. By and large, SGMs, AGMs, I'm into credit union 26, going on 27 years. The attendance is quite poor, or doesn't really reflect the number of members. So maybe that's a consideration for revisiting it in view of the numbers that attended the SGM.
How many people were there?
I don't think it's a North Midlands thing or a Roscommon thing. I think it's just reflective of the not the movement is probably the wrong word, but just how it operates. Members, by and large, as you can see from all the polls and the reviews, credit unions are very highly thought of, and maybe regulatory meetings probably don't have the same interest for members. I'm sure.
But how many members would North Midlands have in total, and how many were in the room?
In total, there would be approximately 70,000 members. Attending the meeting, there would have been less than 100.
Wow.
Yeah.
The 100 have a very strong voice then.
That's exactly.
And of course, we've no way to know whether the outcome would have been any different among a larger sample size, but all we know is that it is nevertheless the rule that those in the room have the vote, and even though you won the majority of the room, it was just a simple majority. You didn't get to the 75%. So at this stage, what would be your concern as to what may be missed out on, or do you still have the scale already to capitalise on the mortgage market opportunities and other avenues that credit unions are exploring?
Yeah, look, both credit unions, both Roscommon and North Midlands Credit Union, are both strong credit unions in their own right. There is, because the transfer engagement hasn't gone through, we'll both open our doors, we'll both be able to serve our members, and we're both strong credit unions, and that will continue. Sorry, the first part again, Will?
So I was just simply saying, does it limit your ability to exploit the opportunities in, let's say, the mortgage market, other forms of lending, and indeed other opportunities commercially that credit unions are increasingly embracing, even
yes.
Technological, for instance, trying to move to harmonized apps and so on? Do you have the scale still to do that?
Well, this would definitely have been of benefit, and this would have strengthened broad credit unions. It would have been opportunities. For example, Roscommon doesn't currently offer mortgages or maybe larger loans. So I think it's a missed opportunity from that point of view.
I appreciate your time, and we will obviously watch and see if there is going to be a learning and maybe in time another vote on this. But for the moment, thank you very much for taking the call today.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you.
Now, 0818 300 103 is my number. If you are a member of North Midlands Credit Union who had a concern, what exactly was the fear in this merger going ahead? But that's the view of Derek Smith just a moment ago. He's the CEO of North Midlands Credit Union. Next, keep that hose pipe where it is, because in some counties the ban is being lifted, but in other parts of the Midlands it very much remains. Let's find out why after these.
The name you trust, with the news you need. Midlands Today. Midlands 103.
Well, we finally got some rain, but apparently not enough rain everywhere. So people in Westmeath and Longford can put the hose pipe back into service very soon, but cross the county boundary into Offaly or into Laois, and those restrictions remain right through until the end of September. And it's a striking illustration of just how unevenly this summer's dry weather has affected our local drinking supplies. Ishka Aaron says conservation efforts and improved conditions mean restrictions can end in 13 counties, but water sources in much of the east and south still haven't recovered sufficiently. James Joyce is Water Treatment Operations Manager with Uisce Éireann. James, good morning.
Good morning, Will. Thanks for having me on.
So we've seen the rain and the grass is getting greener again, but why are some parts of the Midlands still effectively in drought when it comes to drinking water?
Yeah, so Will, obviously Uisce Éireann has made the decision to extend the water conservation order for 13 counties and lifted it for 13 others, and obviously Laois and Offaly is included in the water conservation order until the end of September. I suppose, although conditions have improved, Will, in many parts of the country, like our water sources in Laois and Offaly need more time to recover. And this extension will help us protect the supplies and hopefully reduce the risk to any disruptions to customers.
So, for instance, does the nature of the water source impact your decision, where some will be, let's say, fed from lakes that have streams and rivers coming in, others are groundwater?
Absolutely, Will, yeah. So, obviously, we're feeling our sources are under pressure in Laois and Offaly because in South Offaly it's predominantly ground sources in terms of boreholes and wells, and Laois is predominantly wells and boreholes as well, where obviously you see in Longford Westmead where it's fed from the Shannon and from bigger lakes as well. So this extension of the conservation order is to predominantly help the natural spring or natural wells to recover. And traditionally we're moving into the time of year where well levels would run low anyway. But obviously that has been exacerbated by the drought we've gone through.
And
so our
how
appeal
much of this
today
is down to the nature of the water source, and how much of it is because the rain perhaps was heavier in some parts of the country?
No, well, the rainfall has been minimal, and it takes a long time for rainfall to have an effect on our sources, and takes months and months for our sources to recover. So following on from our previous appeals for conservation, we've seen a meaningful impact, in fairness, from across our demand. But our demand is still high across Laois and Offaly. We're appealing again for people to make the small changes that they have been doing, keep reporting the leaks to us. The number of leaks reports to us we've seen a massive rise in the amount of leaks being reported. Our crews are out repairing them. But we're just asking for the public to keep up that good work, to allow us to keep continuing to deliver for customers and business across the region.
And why are there so many leaks? Is there a common cause, or is it just random cracks and disconnections?
We've aging network, pressure differentials, people dig third-party strikes on it, variable. There's always been leaks, we're always repairing them, but, we're just putting in extra resources into repairing the leaks during this period. And, I have to put a big shout out and a thank you to all our crews and contractors who have been putting the shoulder to the wheel there the last couple of months to really help to making sure that we've very little disruption to customers.
When it comes to consumption, what's the divide between domestic and commercial? Because the ban only applies to households.
Well, obviously, we're in the business of we need to keep obviously the economy moving and to drive growth. So businesses, we're not putting pressure on businesses to make any change. Obviously, we appeal to people. Businesses make their own decisions in terms of water conservation and to manage water and make all the small changes they need to do. But our real appeal here is just for our domestic customers to make the very small changes. We're not really looking for massive changes here. As you know, we spoke about this already, Will. The garden hose, the shower, take the shower. Simple thing, turn off the tap, brush the teeth, run the washing machine and dishwasher when it's full. Really, those small changes really help us,
Yeah, but I suppose for transparency, and maybe people feel it's somewhat pointless to not run the tap for too long if there's a large water user in business nearby. Would domestic still account for the majority of water consumption?
Don't have the figures, Will, but domestic is still our large user as well for us, yeah. Don't have the exact figures across Laois and Offaly, yeah.
And is it possible, depending on the weather in the next couple of weeks, that the ban may be lifted earlier?
No, it's in place now, Will, until the end of September. Decisions will be made coming closer to that time. It'll be obviously data-driven decisions. We'll wait on the data and the rainfall. Obviously, we're not hoping for too much rainfall for people to enjoy. We're after having a great summer, but we've there's farmers out there, different businesses like ourselves, looking for the soft Irish rain. Well, that we're not getting anymore. The soft Irish day. So at the moment, it's in place until the 30th of September, Will.
Yeah, well, as I look at the forecast for the week ahead, certainly tomorrow, Thursday, there's a 90% chance of rain in the Midlands. So I'd say that's fairly nailed on as the schools are going back. So there will be a change. Whether it's enough of a change is a matter we'll have to keep tabs on.
Exactly, Will. But listen, Will, I suppose it's again, thanks very much to all our customers. They've made the small changes. We have seen the improvements in our data. It's allowed us to continue to supply water for the businesses, for the hospitals. It allows us to keep the economy moving, to allows us to run. We've major festivals coming up across the Midlands in the next couple of weeks. We've Electric Picnic in Laois, we've the ploughing in Offaly. All those events are all still happening due to the everybody's small changes.
Appreciate your time today and for keeping us updated. Thank you very much for taking the call.
Thanks, Will.
James Joyce is the Water Treatment Operations Manager with Uisce Éireann. So, have you ever heard somebody say that the rural pub is dead? Who's going out anymore? Well, I came across a brilliant video, and you should follow JJ Hock's Singing Pub on the socials, because Ger and the team, first of all, they put up some content that will make you laugh. But from time to time, they also put up material that's really, really thought-provoking. Like this.
I heard two fellas say in a podcast that the Irish pub is a thing of the past. Been swapped for a sauna and spa. Instead of pints and crack, it's namaste and blah blah. A gospel of opinion preached from the podcast pulpit by two lads from the Pale, hard tell if they were male, spotty faces still in braces, accents of the mid-Atlantic variety, lecturing the world on sobriety. The future being AI, so old ways must die. Well, I'm here to declare this institution has survived Viking invasion, wars, plagues and mass immigration. And I reckon it still has a few pints left in the conversation. Maybe we're entering an age of digital fatigue, working from home, Google Chrome, Zoom, doom scrolls taking its toll. When COVID hit, we had the phone in our hands, screens in our faces, but what did we miss? People, places and the crack. The pub wasn't just a place for a pint, but a living space to make a point, tell a story, sing a song, and discover you'd been arguing with the wrong fella all along. The internet doesn't have to kill the pubs. I use it to open the doors wider, creating a global living room for international relations to boom. People are hungry for something real. Food round a table, a tall tale or fable, live music in the air, a cool pint of beer, and laughter you can actually hear. The pub is the antidote to isolation, the community's living room, the heart of the nation, filled with characters, laughter and cheer, and some vulgar wisdom shouted from someone 3 pints in the rear. And when those podcasters tire of ChatGPT's convenient lore, they'll wander back to the original oracle they've ignored before, the barstool philosopher, who may rarely be right, but he'll confidently explain why the whole world's full of shite.
Yes, Ger Hawk from Hawk's Singing Pub in Banagher. Right, Midlands 103, live from Cloughan tomorrow in County Offaly, supported by the News Reporting Scheme. And what issues shall we shine a spotlight on when we are in that area? Shall it be the rural pub, and whether it is in decline or whether it is thriving? Maybe it just needs some imagination and a little bit of innovation in order to survive. So that's 24 hours from now, Midlands 103 in Cloughan in County Offaly. Got something to say to us when we're there? Pick up that phone now and call 0818 300 103. Here are Mumford and Sons.
Love the Midlands? Love Midlands 103.
Well, good morning. Still to come today. Not all pain is the same. But medically, why is that? The decline of board pneumona jobs and just how many new positions have been created through just transition. And the detective who investigated the cases of missing women in Leinster, including that of Fiona Pender, on his biggest regret relating to her disappearance. That's in just over an hour's time. When you call, 0818 300 103 is my number. You can text, you can WhatsApp, 083 30 10 103, powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore. If you're one of 200 people living with Friedreich's ataxia in Ireland, well, today's meeting inside the HSE is anything but administrative, because there is no cure for this rare genetic condition which steadily damages your nervous system, affects your movement, and in some cases your heart. But there is now a drug called Skyclarys, and it's the first licensed medicine specifically for this condition. The figure cited by the HSE to pay for it is €280,000 per patient per year. And today, senior management is expected to decide what happens next. But there has been a development in the past few hours. Niamh Griffin is health correspondent with the Irish Examiner. Good morning.
Good morning, Will. Thanks for having us on to talk about this. It's such a sad, complicated issue, isn't it?
It is. And ultimately, I suppose, economics don't reflect always the humanity of these decisions. But who exactly is around that table and what options are on the table? Mm-hmm.
So the HSE senior management are the sort of final level in the discussion, in the decision-making process. So it's passed through already a number of other layers that would have included medical people, clinical people, and people looking at the health economics of it. So this treatment, it's not a cure, but it does slow down the physical deterioration for people with this disease. So it would give people a better quality of life and a better chance, as some of them have said, to hang on, and maybe a cure will be invented or created. So we know
one
just
of the,
today,
I suppose, grey areas is whether it is effective for all and to the same extent for all. So what does the research say?
Well, it's been discussed across Europe. I suppose people are looking at different issues. Skyclarys themselves would be very open about the fact that it slows down deterioration over time. So you're talking about over a number of years. And some other countries have raised questions about this. Holland, for example, asked if they said in order for them to approve it, they would need an 84% price cut. Based on what was being offered to them. And we don't know what was being offered to them, really. I've seen different reports of it, but you'd imagine it was something similar to what the HSE has been offered. And we do know just today that Biogen have come in with a last-minute new offer, and that's now being considered at today's meeting.
And that's as much as we know. We don't know how materially it changes what was previously on the table.
No, not yet. And I suppose what the HSE are looking at is the impact for the patient, how much it will benefit the patient, and then also this wider picture that I suppose we don't think about so much is if you take 280,000 per 200 people out of potentially 200 people out of the budget, what difference does that make to other services that you're offering? So they're weighing up all of that, but I'm sure for anybody who either has the condition or knows someone who has it, that is not really something they're really worried about.
And then politics enters the room. So the Taoiseach has met families, government TDs have been lobbying, opposition parties have demanded action, and yet government insists it's an independent decision-making process. Is it really non-political?
The decision-making insofar as today has to be non-political. It has to be based on clinical issues and the budget as the HSE's budget stands now. But where there is a huge potential for political impact is in looking at the HSE's new drugs budget. So they spend about $4 billion a year on drugs, but many questions being asked now over whether that's enough. When you look at the cost potentially of these new drugs, not just Biogen's Skyclarys, but new drugs for cancer, for weight loss, like Mounjaro, we know is a very, very expensive weight loss medication. So there, I suppose, questions being asked over whether the budget is taking account of all of that. and other people saying maybe it's time for Ireland, instead of standing alone as such a small market, do agreements need to be made? So maybe if Ireland and Holland and Belgium and Denmark were considered one market, would they get a better deal from pharma companies, for example?
So there is another problem as well on precedent, because if there is a decision to grant this or even to allow some sort of early access scheme, then the next group of very deserving and worthy patients who have a rare condition will rightly ask, what about us? So is precedent a consideration here, or is it all down to what the numbers say?
I think it's maybe feeding into it. Like, there's a lot of different factors that people like Michael Barry would be over one of the level of discussion, and he's talked about that you have to look at your relationship, I suppose, with other pharma companies. And I mean, we've seen this before. People might remember the cystic fibrosis. There was a new drug for that condition a few years ago, and very, very distressing, people feeling they were being left out. And a group of doctors at that time wrote an open letter saying they felt it was for children, the drug was, and they felt the children were being used as pawns in the negotiation between the pharma company and the HSE. Because, of course, it suits pharmaceutical companies to have all of this advocacy happening on behalf of their product. Because they're private companies at the end of the day. They would say they spend the money on research and on development, and that they owe an answer to their shareholders. So there's a lot of very different motivations probably involved in the debate.
Well, there's another dimension which spreadsheets don't capture very well. The disease is progressive. So if a patient loses function while negotiations continue, then even if the drug is approved months or years later, it doesn't restore what they've already lost. So does that urgency feed into the criteria on the table today, or is that completely unrelated?
You would imagine that it does. I don't know, to be honest. I haven't seen the full list of their criteria, but you would imagine that it should. You would hope, right? I mean, we've seen even just in the last few weeks, some of the some of the patients who've been protesting, they've talked about deterioration since just during the few months of the campaign. Because it's such a horribly, rapidly progressing disease. Like, people will have seen Craig Cody talking about his sons, Rory and Paddy, and the devastating impact on their family that the disease has. So we just have to wait and see how many of these factors feed in. But I do think a lot of it, from what they've said, is down to the cost and whether Biogen can meet them halfway on that issue.
Well, we know that other European countries have managed to do deals, and after a very similar debate to what we've had here. Do we know if they're paying more, or whether they've negotiated better prices, or is everything confidential?
Everything is confidential, unfortunately, Will, and that's it's very frustrating. You can't. If you were buying anything else, you could go online and you could do a comparison, but all of these deals are made individually, and that's maybe an issue, I suppose, with the way the European structure is. So the European Medicines Agency approves the drug for Europe, and then every pharma company has to take their product individually to the 27 countries if they want to sell it there and make individual agreements. And everything, as you say, is confidential. Secretive is another word for that. And it plays in the pharma company's favour, I think. Now, you would hope that behind the scenes people know each other in any industry, and you would hope that there is some level of discussion that we don't know about between countries. But on a superficial level, it's very difficult to compare. And then you also have the issue that Germany, for example, has a very good system where they release medications and negotiations often continue while patients get early access. but they're coming from a very different financial situation to Ireland. Much bigger budget, much bigger population. So the factors involved are really different.
So economies of scale may kick in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Finally, Niamh,
unfortunately,
you've been speaking to the families who are directly affected by this. For those 200 people or so, obviously they're hoping to hear yes today. But what's their plan if they hear no?
I think they'll just continue campaigning. I mean, there is no other drug for them. There is no other option. This is the only licensed drug that's been found effective to help in helping them. So, I mean, people would have seen Craig Cody crying very openly, emotionally, saying he's already lost one son, and he's faced with the prospect of the disease progressing as rapidly in his second son as well. Which is a very hard thing to even say, isn't it? Never mind to contemplate looking at your own child and thinking that. So I don't know what they will do. I would imagine they will continue campaigning. I know that some politicians, people like Senator Teresa Costello, John McGuinness, they've been very, very supportive of them. All of the opposition parties calling for solutions. So you would hope that there will be some support somehow for them to get access.
Niamh, very grateful for your time today. Thanks for the call.
No problem. Thanks for having us on. Thank you.
You can read more from the pen of Niamh Griffin. She's the health correspondent with the Irish Examiner. 10:20.
Midlands Today with Will Faulkner. Find out what you missed earlier at midlands103.com.
Let's go to your comments. So one listener asks, how can we put on a fire with a back boiler if we can't use the water? Well, I certainly don't think the hosepipe ban is intended to restrict the use of a back boiler. Not for a moment. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we won't have very cold weather where you'll need that within the next couple of weeks while that hosepipe ban is in place. Oh, perish the thought. At least today, anyway, it's still reasonably mild, 17 degrees in many parts of the Midlands. Will, you mentioned earlier about men being so reluctant to talk to their doctor about losing weight, and you used the term old-fashioned diet and exercise. Your body is like a car engine. So if you put in dirty fuel in the car, it ends up in the garage. If we put in dirty fuel to our bodies, well, we know where our garage is. It's the hospital. So it's no old diet. It's just healthy eating in proper amounts. And then, if you have the use of your legs, be grateful for it. Yeah, they say movement is the best form of exercise. So whatever that happens to be, better to be moving than staying in one place. Well, it's amazing how we have hundreds of millions to spend on projects all over the world, be it to support Volodymyr Zelensky or dubious regimes and institutions. But the Irish people have to beg and plead for drugs like this. That's from Brian in Portlaoise. 083 3010 103. Text or WhatsApp, powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore. Well, if you think you could be the next Madonna, the next huge music sensation, well, the search is on for Ireland's new local hero. So if you make original music of any kind, Midlands 103 wants to hear from you. And not alone will we play your song on the air, but you've a chance to win a €10,000 prize package, including $5,000 in cash, industry mentoring, a label release, guaranteed airplay nationwide, not just here on your favourite radio station, but all over the country. So, Midlands103.com, check out Irish Music Month. And it is Irish Radio, proudly supporting Irish artists. Now, I mentioned earlier the decision by the members of North Midlands Credit Union not to approve a merger with Roscommon Credit Union. And one listener says, I'm really pleased to hear that, because credit unions are increasingly behaving like banks. They hide behind a phone for everything, or indeed online. And the further decision-making moves from the community, the worse off the community will be. Now, the counter-argument from the credit unions in any merger situation is that decision-making still remains local. But nevertheless, in the case of North Midlands Credit Union, they didn't reach the required 75% majority for the merger to go ahead. 10:30, and up next, Health Matters. And the next time you have a conversation with your doctor and they ask, what sort of pain is it? Well, how exactly do you describe pain? It's a sharp pain, or it's a dull pain. Well, we'll be giving you some terms that just might make that whole conversation easier after these.
Midlands Today with Will Faulkner, with the stories beyond the headlines. Midlands 103.
If you miss Top Gear on a Sunday evening, and for years it was essential viewing, certainly in my house. Interesting story coming out of the BBC. Apparently the comedian Jimmy Carr is in talks to front a brand new reboot of Top Gear 4 years after the series was shelved. So I think he would be a brilliant choice. He is a petrol head, he knows his cars, and he is absolutely hilarious, but incredibly intelligent and sharp as well. So let's watch that space, see if it happens. So when you go to your doctor and they ask you to describe a pain, it can be a very difficult conversation. How exactly do you find the terminology or the words? So let's focus on pain today. And Dr. D is with us, Deirdre Ford from Kayla Medical in Athlone and Kilbeggan. Good morning.
Good morning, Will.
So, different types of pain. You as a doctor will have the technical terms. So bring us through that, but also what they feel like.
Okay, so there are two types of pain. Normal pain that we experience, there's so many different words to describe it. It's called nociceptive pain. Okay, so that's the pain that we normally describe for everyday sort of difficulties. And then there's neuropathic pain, which is completely different. It's related to the nervous system, and it has different symptoms like burning or stabbing or whatever. But anyway, let's have a look at the common things when someone goes to a GP and they describe maybe cramping pain. So that would lead us to believe that it's got to do with the bowel, like the bowel is going into spasm if it's in your tummy, or you could have cramping pain in your leg, again, muscle spasm there. If you are talking about a stinging pain, maybe when you go to the loo, that points us towards a urinary tract infection. Or if you describe a stabbing pain, when you take a deep breath in because you have a chest infection, that kind of signifies maybe a type of pleurisy, where the pleura, it has been infected, the outer lining of the chest wall. And then other ones will, like, I've got burning pain in my tummy. Well, that could be definitely, gastritis, or it could be a type of reflux, like your esophagus is basically on fire too. And then we've got the squeezing chest pain. So that could be heart, or it could well be a bit of reflux also. So we have to try and differentiate between them. But anyway.
Yeah, one is very, very serious, and the other is, well, you don't want to ignore reflux either in case it's Barrett's esophagus or something that's developing down there either.
Exactly. And I do remember one time I was doing out of hours down in Clonmel, and normally, there's a walk-in up to a certain time, but we were just finishing up at about 3:00, and a man walked in, and he was a farmer, and he still had his welly boots on, and he said, I've got this awful burning pain in my chest. He said, it feels like indigestion, and I'm after having a load of Lucozade to try and get the gas up, but the pain was still there. And luckily enough, there was an ambulance outside the centre where we were, and I went out to the ambulance and I said, can you do an ECG on this man? He was in the middle of having a heart attack.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and did he survive?
Especially, men especially, if they feel, I have a bit of indigestion, do not ignore that kind of centre pressure pain, and they think it's indigestion. It could be a heart attack.
Did the poor man survive, Deirdre?
He did. He was down to Cork, and he had stents in, and he did well, yeah.
Sometimes finding the words, the vocabulary to describe pain can be difficult. And are there some that are tricky, that even for you as a doctor, when somebody's coming in, it's very hard to define it?
Yeah, so, we all know what throbbing, try and describe what you have. So somebody who's got throbbing pain, so say you hit your nail with a hammer, that's throbbing pain. You're after bursting a blood vessel there and the blood is collecting, and that's a throbbing pain. So also as well, if you've got, say, a tooth infection, that's going to throb like hell because the whole blood supply there is becoming infected, and you've got an abscess, so it's usually bacterial infection. Or say you've got throbbing pain in your face, and it feels like your head is throbbing, but your face feels as if it's going to explode. That's probably a severe sinusitis that has fluid levels in it. So, by teasing out what exactly and where exactly the pain is, we can kind of narrow it down pretty quickly to what the probable cause is.
And sometimes can pain travel?
Oh yes, you can get referred pain then. So pain that doesn't actually originate in the particular organ or area. So for example, one of the common ones is pain in the right shoulder, which is associated with a little bit of dull ache in the right side of your tummy, and maybe a little bit of reflux. Believe it or not, that's cholecystitis. That's inflammation of your gallbladder. So what's happening there is that the gallbladder is completely inflamed. It's sitting just beside the diaphragm. There's a nerve called the phrenic nerve under the diaphragm, and that nerve is that pain then is referred to your shoulder.
Wow.
Yeah.
You'd never make the connection.
No. And the other thing too is pain, deep stabbing pain right in the middle of your stomach, just between, just under your sternum there, that goes into your back, straight into your back. You might be complaining, I've got back pain, but in fact, it's originating from your stomach, and that can be pancreatitis.
Can emotional pain ever manifest as physical pain?
Yes, emotional pain. People will come in feeling tired or exhausted or feeling terrible. I just don't feel well today. And an awful lot of the time, it can be, when we go through the examination and we do their bloods and everything seems to be normal, it could well be an emotional type of pain. What's going on in the background? Is there a lot of stresses going on? What's work like? And you have to dig deep at that stage.
Yeah, and then trying to resolve that, I suppose, is, well, how long is a piece of string?
Exactly. So, a lot of pain can present, a lot of people might present to the GP with pain when in fact there isn't an awful lot wrong with them, only that it's emotional, it's a stressor that's causing all of this.
Deirdre, stay there for a few minutes if you don't mind. Deirdre's with us until 11 o'clock this morning. So if you'd like to talk to her, or indeed if you want me to put your question forward, pick up that phone. Call 0818 300 103. Or indeed, if you're in work, send a sneaky text or WhatsApp to 083 30 10 103, powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore. Almost 11:15 already.
Love the Midlands? Love Midlands Today with Will Faulkner.
Midlands 103.
Still to come in around a half an hour's time, the detective who investigated the disappearance of Fiona Pender from Tullamore 30 years ago discusses some of his biggest regrets in relation to that case, but also those of other missing women across Leinster during the 1990s. Deirdre Ford is with us, Dr. D from Kayla Medical in Athlone and Kilbeggan. And our next question, or rather I suppose it's our first listener question, comes from Lisa, who says, there's always talk about vitamin D when summer finishes, and already I've noticed the evenings drawing in, And when I woke at 6 o'clock this morning, I had to turn on the light in the bedroom for the first time. There wasn't enough daylight outside. So, when should people in Ireland start taking it? And does everybody need a supplement?
Yeah, I think, well, everybody should take a vitamin D supplement because, as I said before in this programme, babies now, when they're born, are automatically given vitamin D drops because we do not get enough sunshine in this country. And I know we had a glorious summer, but yes, you do absolutely need to take a vitamin D supplement.
Margaret says her hands have started feeling stiff once she wakes, but they're fine when she gets moving. And she's wondering, is morning stiffness normal as you get older, or could it be arthritis?
Well, both of them go hand in hand, really, don't they? You know, some early morning stiffness, whether it be hands, whether it be hip, that improves with mobility can be an early sign of early arthritis. But, you know, joint stiffness is more common as you get older. Now, especially in women, again, menopause, if you're experiencing stiffness and joint pain, that could be hormone related too. So never forget that.
Yeah, men get a different form of morning stiffness. We shan't mention that.
Yes,
now,
indeed.
Next listener says, I have an awful pain in my shoulder and it extends into my arm and sometimes I feel like it's a dead arm. I did have shingles not so long ago and I didn't have this before the shingles. So how to deal with it?
So it depends on, I'm assuming she must have had some sort of shingles on her arm. She didn't actually say where the shingles was, but if she's a pain in her shoulder and that's where the shingles area was, it could certainly be what's called neuralgia. Neuralgia is very common post shingles. It's basically pain in the nerve path that the shingles rash did present on. But normally when you have shingles, we normally give some sort of treatment in the event of post-herpetic neuralgia anyway. So I think maybe just go back to the doctor and get that checked out.
Betty is wondering, has the doctor heard of burning mouth syndrome?
Well, guess what, Betty? I don't know what age you are, but burning mouth is a very common cause of hormonal fluctuations in women as they get older. So burning mouth and burning tongue, yes.
And so if it's hormone related, how do you get rid of it or at least bring it under control?
So if it's hormonal related and you're in your 40s and you're probably perimenopausal and you have other kind of perimenopausal symptoms where hormones are fluctuating, some hormone replacement therapy can help there. But again, I don't know what age she is, but it's one thing that can be looked at holistically overall. You know, is there something else going on? Have you joint pain? Have you got a little bit of hot flushes? You know, the usual stuff with regard to menopause. So yeah, have a chat with your doctor.
Amy would like you to talk about frozen shoulder. So she's already had 5 injections and a course of tablets, but her arms are still very painful. So a quick explainer, Dee. What is frozen shoulder? How's it caused?
Okay, so it's the brachial plexus basically in your shoulder. It's all the tendons and all the ligaments there. There's a huge myriad of stuff going on there. And frozen shoulder can be caused by all of these tendons and ligaments basically sticking together because there's been an awful lot of maybe overuse or inflammation, or there could even be a tiny tear there. But I'm not sure if she's been to a physiotherapist, but one of the things we like to do is if you've got chronic frozen shoulder that is not being resolved, we don't like to keep injecting them because that's not good for the ligaments and the tendons because they'll get very soft and then they're likely to tear. So, you know, no more than say 2 or 3 injections, then you'd need to go and see an orthopedic surgeon. All you may need is what's called manipulation under anaesthetic. So they bring you in as a day case, knock you out, give you a general anaesthetic and basically manipulate that shoulder to free it.
All right. 083 30 10 103. Will, I've pain in the right side of my groin. I did have a hernia operation before, but now the pain is pretty constant and scans are showing no sign of a hernia. So is there another possible cause?
Pain in the right groin, male or female, I'm not really sure.
Male in this case.
Male. So, you know what? Go to the physio first of all, okay, and ask the physio to have a look. And I'm not sure what kind of scans he had. Was it ultrasound? Was it an MRI? Was it a CT? Have you had blood work done? Go to physio first and see if they can find a cause for it.
Our next listener is 69 years of age. She's a lady who was never treated for menopause, but still has hot sweats even now at 69. She has joint pain, and it's really becoming a bother. So she's wondering how you would approach this, and is it too late to get help?
She's 69. It's never too late. She could certainly try a low-dose hormone replacement therapy. We always say as you get older, go low and slow. So very, very gentle. It would certainly alleviate the hot flushes and the sweats. And there is also another drug called Veoza, which is on the market now for, it deals with night sweats and hot flushes. So that you could go and talk to your GP. If your GP won't actually listen to you, go and see a menopause specialist.
Next listener, will you ask Dr. D about my left knee, which is quite painful to bend, for example, when standing up after sitting, but there's no pain at all while I'm walking. So that sounds like a pain that loosens up.
If there's a bit of stiffness there, the first thing to do, maybe just get an x-ray done of it. I mean, it's the first thing you can do and just see, is there anything there that suggests there might be a little bit of grit or anything like that in it. But if you've no pain on walking, so that means that the menisci are fine, your tendons, your lateral tendons are fine. So maybe just a simple x-ray initially and just to see is there anything else there.
Next, a query from Caroline, who is in her 50s and her husband is also in his 50s. They've had good general health and he doesn't want to go for a check because he feels perfectly fine. And she's wondering, given his age, because she's going to her doctor on a regular basis, what should be checked routinely for a 50-something-year-old man?
So he needs his blood pressure checked. So blood pressure, get his pulse checked, get his oxygen levels checked. It's just a little thing that you put on your finger, and his regular bloods. And all of the standard bloods, which would be liver, cholesterol, kidney function, thyroid, prostate, testosterone, full blood count, those regular bloods, but look for testosterone levels as well in it.
Next listeners say they were diagnosed with plantar fasciitis in the heel. How do I get it treated? Oh boy, I had this not so long ago. It's a game of patience, unfortunately. Yeah,
so you need to go to physiotherapists with that. They're really good at those. You know, you have to get these nearly balls, they're like tennis balls that you actually try and stretch out that fascia. Now it depends again, are we male or female? Male or female, Will?
Male, I think.
Male,
well,
okay.
I'm looking at the picture, and there's a man and a woman in it, but the name is James, so I'm assuming male.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I was going to say, if it was female, again, it can be, a lot of physios now are starting to send women that they know, they're starting to realise that some women of a certain age, that some of their ailments when they go to physiotherapy are actually hormonal. And plantar fasciitis, it can be one of those, hormonal one in women. But for a male, you need to actually go to physio. That needs to be stretched out and given exercises.
Can I just clarify, when I had it, it was from overuse on running. I'm not becoming hormonal. Officially, anyway.
No, you're definitely not. Well, no, you're right. And if you are a runner, you would actually need to make sure that you change your running shoes regularly because they just wear out.
Oh, big time. Big time. Deirdre, always great chatting with you. Thanks for the call.
You're welcome. Good morning, Will.
You can look up Dr. D at Kayla Medical in Athlone and Kilbeggan. News at 11 on the way next.
Love the Midlands? Love
Midlands 103.
Good morning, and still to come today. Well, unfortunately, we are hearing that 4 out of 5 school principals are burning out. And you might think, well, hang on, they don't know problems compared to how I have in my job or whatever the case may be. But, well, let's hear them out. And why would so many of them be saying the job is that taxing? Also, the detective who 30 years on recalls the disappearance of Fiona Pender tells us why he feels to this day that he has failed her family. But first, Shannon Bridge lost hundreds of jobs with the end of peat harvesting, and the impact is still being felt. But now there's a proposal that could bring up to 100 new jobs back to West Offaly. So could this be the start of something significant for the area? Well, Kieran Malooly is an Independent Ireland MEP for the Midlands North West. Kieran, what can you tell us? Good morning.
Well, good morning. Good morning to you and to your listeners on Midlands Radio 3. Well, I suppose this goes back to a discussion, Will, that you and I had a long time ago about the Just Transition region and what happened in the aftermath of the closure. I think particularly of the Board Namona Works. That's what the main employment was. People, your listeners will know Blackwater Works, Boer Works, up there, hundreds and hundreds of people who lost their jobs. And there was a Just Transition Fund, but to be honest about it, it catered for tourism to some degree, and it didn't really provide any type of a legacy industry that would create employment in the area. And I suppose that's the background to this situation. So I was contacted a number of weeks back by an industrialist operating from County Leitrim called JJ Hara. JJ is involved in a company called Futurecast, and he's involved in the engineering sector in general, but he is engaged with the Just Transition Fund, and he's engaged with other funds that are available to him. And what he does is he works, I suppose, closely with Enterprise Ireland as well to identify opportunities for industry in regions, and particularly in the Just Transition region, because there is still some funding available to him for the planning process for an industry. So what's he looking for? He's looking for a site. It would have to be, because of the time restraints, it would have to be zoned for industrial. And I suppose that's what brings us to Shannon Bridge on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock when we're going to the community hall there for this meeting with the members of the public. He has I wouldn't say it's a heavy industrial project. It's an industrial project involving fire testing. I'm not up to speed with the entire project. Yeah, well, JJ Hara will explain this on Thursday briefly, because I've heard him explain it already. If you have, say, for instance, porta cabins or mobile homes or things like that, in the new scenario where you're putting a porta cabin in the back garden or something like that, all of those buildings have to be fire tested. In other words, they have to be brought into a building, brought into a set of circumstances where they can be tested with protective materials, protective substances, and fire, clearly to ensure they're safe. Now, that's very generally the type of industry he's looking for a home for. It's not a massive industry. Initially, he talks about creating 35 to 45 jobs, but what he wants to do is create a hub, because he's done this already. He's done it in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim. He's located a derelict building in that area. He's put in the initial manufacturing industry type project, and then he's put in 4 or 5 smaller projects, building it up to over 100 jobs. And he thinks he can do the same in the Midlands region, and that's why he's looking at Shannon Bridge in particular, because he feels that with all the ESB and Board Namona activities, he feels there must be a building in that area, a derelict building, that would be suitable to get this started.
And are these skilled positions capable of supporting families locally, or are they relatively low-paid jobs?
Well, this is the question I asked him when we met first, and we talked about there are jobs basically for the type of people who used to get jobs in Pordenone as apprentices many years ago. He's talking about people involved, maybe fitters, mechanics, people who I remember at Will myself every winter. I went to a tech myself. Every winter we'd have block release apprentices coming in from all over Ireland in the Midlands. They came to Banner and Shannon Bridge and Lanesborough and all these areas where they did the work with Pordenone during the summer, and during the winter they did basic training as fitters, mechanics and engineers and some of them electricians. He's talking about someone in the same category. There'd be a mix of skills required, but he feels that there's an opening there, and I think he has a point. I mean, well, if you drive today to Shannon Bridge, around that territory, you'll find people who park in the car down there at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and gone to Dublin to work someplace. A lot of these people are young people. Traditionally, they would have got a job on board Namona during the summer. They'd be out the bog at the moment. Many of them would be there. And that position is gone. And I know we've made progress in terms of other areas, and Offaly, and particularly in the area of wind farms. It's often said Offaly is to be the wind farm capital of the country. You know, I'm not against it. I think we need the energy going forward. But the truth is, we do not have the same employment levels from the wind farm industry. You're talking about 2 or 3 jobs for a wind farm. It's not something that equates with a long-term legacy for employment in an area. And that's why I want JJ Hara to have his chance to speak to the public and speak to other industrialists on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in Shannon Bridge. He's a good project, and I believe he has experience to make it happen. And I think it's time we discuss this, because we just can't go forward saying that, you know, we're satisfied if you live in Clara or Ratford Bridge or Forban that your son or daughter should work in Dublin going forward. Do we really want that? Or do we want employment locally?
It's not strictly true that nothing has happened on employment. ESB has built temporary emergency generators in Shannon Bridge. There's battery storage infrastructure being developed. The Dalton Centre beside the former power station has been offered as an enterprise opportunity. So is the problem really a lack of state investment rather than perhaps private investment?
I think a lack of state focus, and I think particularly in the area of apprenticeships and training. You know, it happened very quickly. I'm not blaming people. The closure happened very quickly. There was a court legal move, and then the government, in its wisdom, decided not to appeal it, and they went closed down within 2 years. So they didn't get a chance, I suppose, to work on something. But I was very disappointed we didn't have a special apprentice training school set up in West Offaly and indeed in South Longford, where the 2 power stations were. And I think it wasn't the fault of locals. I think it was the fault of government. At the time, there was a focus on a different type of apprenticeship scheme around the country, and they chose not to get involved. I think that was a missed opportunity. We could have compensated people, employers, to a better degree in this area to continue working. We have good industry, you're right. There is, you know, look at Grants and Burr, look at other manufacturing companies that are there in the Midlands. But I think we've given up on these Pordenone areas to some extent, and we're saying that renewables are the future. Now, renewables may well be the future energy-wise. I'm not denying that, but they do not create the employment levels. You mentioned the battery project at Shannon Bridge. You're talking about a handful of jobs. You mentioned the Dalton Centre, which is a good example of what we're talking about going forward. That project was taken over by Offaly County Council, and recently I brought JJ Hara down to that site, and he's in the process of linking up another company to make a bid to use that building. And that company is saying they'll create 15 jobs at the Dalton Centre. That's what I want to see. I want to see jobs in that still skilled and semi-skilled areas again created locally, even in small numbers. Okay. I don't laugh at 15 jobs or 30 jobs or 40 jobs. That's significant to a town like Shannon Bridge and to
I was about to say
area.
Exactly. Yeah, 15 jobs in Shannon Bridge might as well be 150 in Tullamore, for example. But there is a danger with public meetings. If you went to the supermarket
down there, they'll tell you that.
There is a danger with public meetings that everybody agrees something should happen, and then everybody goes home. So you're an MEP. Enterprise Ireland has a role, Offaly County Council has a role, ESB and Pordenone control assets, so they have a role. But who actually has the power to say yes to this project?
I think there are 3 key bodies involved in this. Offaly County Council have stepped up to the plate in what they've done with the Dalton Centre. I think Pordenone and ESB still have a responsibility to listen to local people and listen to local industrialists who are looking for space. I brought forward a file to the European Parliament last year, in September of last year, which made it the policy of the Parliament that in future, state or semi-state companies should donate or hand over property to industry in just transition areas when the opportunity arose. Now, regretfully so far, neither ESB or Board Namona have handed over significant property, and I believe there is derelict sites there. I believe some of the property they have, including at the Shannonbridge West Offaly power plant, which they say they will take down eventually, I believe they have sufficient space on that site to allow projects of this nature that JJR is talking about to be set up. I think they have to be persuaded. I think, like anybody else, they hold on to their property tight, and they've got infrastructure in place and planning in place. I know that. But I still believe, and we've looked at these sites, they're substantial sites, over 20 acres they're available, that there must be space made for local industrial projects when the funding is available and the wherewithal is available. And Futurecast are saying at this meeting on Thursday, they have the wherewithal, they've got planning permission, they've got the funding to go through the planning on this, and they're ready to set it up. They just need a site in an industrially zoned area because of the time span that's involved. So ESB and Board Namona, I'm asking them again to come back to the table. We're doing something similar in Kyle Dove and Kildare, actually, where locals are looking for a site for smaller enterprise units. And I'm appealing to Board Namona and ESB to show a positive attitude towards it. Remember, these communities were good to ESB for 50 and 60 years. It worked both ways. Salaries and were good as well, and support was good. But, we put up with the soot and the smoke and the steam and everything else for 60 years because we knew they were good employers. I say to Board Namona and ESB, you must now turn around and put something substantial in place to help us create an industry base, albeit a small one, going forward, so that the choice of students coming out of the community college in Banagher or Forban is not to say only we're going to work in Dublin. We're going to work in Dublin. We'll park the car in Tullamore and we get the drive up every day. I hate to see those cars parked along the side of the road. I want to see people who have those skills and semi-skills having an option at least to work locally, and that's what Thursday night is all about.
Well, if we were to come back in a year's time and invite you onto this programme, give us even one measurable, tangible action that needs to happen from Thursday night so that people don't say it was another talking shop, it actually delivered jobs.
Well, I think critically, in the case of we're putting the project forward at the moment, I believe that between Bora and Blackwater and Shannonbridge Power Station, West Offaly, there is sufficient space to support this project. So one action would be for ESB and Board Namona to come back to the table and say, you know what, we will open the doors for you, bring in JJR and his team and let them spec out the building and look on it from the perspective of the contribution they must make in terms of a just transition. It hasn't been a just transition for many, many people. I have workers who worked with Board Namona, seasonal workers who worked with Board Namona for 30 and 40 years. Their pension, albeit seasonal workers, is coming in at about 14 or 15 euros a week, Will. And that's crazy stuff. They don't see themselves as having any just transition. They say they contribute on a seasonal basis for 30 or 40 years, and the payments have been abysmal, and because the Board Namona pensions in general haven't been good. So I think the company has an obligation not just to walk away and say, okay, the future is wind farms and solar and all this. The future for them should engage working with the community and trying at least. And when somebody comes, like JJR comes forward with a project, with the funding, with the wherewithal, we must treat it seriously. So that's something I hope will come out of Thursday night, that the ESB Board Namona will say, listen, we have a potential site, let's go and have a look at it tomorrow.
Kieran Mullooly, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Good morning.
Kieran Mullooly is an independent Ireland MEP for the Midlands Northwest. Now, when you call, if you're in Shannonbridge in particular, I'd love to get your take on this. 0818 300 103 is my number. You can text or WhatsApp 083 30 10 103, powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore.
Disagree? Feel free. Text or WhatsApp Midlands Today on 083 30 10 103. Midlands 103.
30 years is a very long time to wait for someone to come home. And on the 23rd of August 1996, Fiona Pender disappeared from her flat on Church Street in Tullamore, and at the time she was 7 months pregnant. And there has been no trace of Fiona or her unborn baby ever since. But this isn't simply an old missing person case gathering dust. Gardaí now describe the disappearance of Fiona as murder. 5 people have been arrested over the years. More than 300 statements have been taken. Thousands of documents examined and extensive searches have been carried out. And there is somebody who has lived with this case for much of those 30 years, because Alan Bailey acted as National Coordinator of Operation Trace, which was the Garda operation established in 1998 to examine the disappearances of Fiona and 5 other young women across Leinster. And he and his team reached a dark conclusion about Fiona more than 2 decades ago, that she had been murdered, and that whoever was responsible was somebody she knew. Alan, good morning.
Good morning, Will.
30 years on, when you hear the name Fiona Pender, what immediately comes to your mind?
I suppose the first thing, Will, is the fact that Fiona is still out there somewhere and has never been reunited with her family and her friends. And it's all very funny to say we don't know definitively who killed her, who was responsible for her death and her disappearance. But there is a family there as well who are grieving and still grieving 30 years on.
And you reached the conclusion in 2001, which is 25 years ago, that she had been murdered. And what brought you to that conclusion?
When you're examining or investigating disappearances of that nature, well, you're always looking for what's referred to as a push-pull factor. That's something that would make her, force her to leave home, maybe a bad scene at home or a rows or something like that. Or the pull might be having fallen in love with someone and deciding to leave home. But that wasn't Fiona. Fiona had everything going for her. She was just 2 months away from giving birth to her first child. A time of great excitement for herself and her mother. The day before she went missing, she was actually out shopping with her mother for the child. So she had no reason to leave. So we were convinced from the get-go that Fiona didn't leave of her own volition.
And you've gone further, because you believe the person responsible was known to her, and obviously without identifying anybody. How strong is the evidence that led you there?
Well, we're quite satisfied from our reading of the evidence. We're quite satisfied that the culprit was well known to her, somebody she trusted and somebody whom she felt she could trust. It's 30 years now, and that person must be still living with the guilt of not only Fiona, but her unborn child also. I mean, it's a double murder no matter how you look at it.
Here's something that many listeners find difficult to understand. So you and your team of dedicated investigators reached that conclusion quite early on, and Operation Trace recommended treating this as murder in 2001, but it was decades later for the formal reclassification to take place. Why?
Do you know something? Well, it's something I've asked myself over the years, what the hesitation was in doing it. We were quite satisfied. It was 6 cases initially taken on by Operation Trace, and all the circumstances of all 6 of those cases would suggest that none of those missing females left of their own volition. So we were satisfied they had met their deaths through foul play and that they were murders. Now, whilst at the outset we were looking to see if there's a commonality, if there's a sort of a serial killer out there operating, we're quite satisfied that in 3 of the instances, 3 of the missing girls knew the identity of the person responsible for their death, and Fiona was one of those.
So, do you believe there is somebody, potentially even listening now, who genuinely possesses information that could solve this case? Because given the amount that has already been put into Garda hands, you would think they should have almost everything they need.
You do have, but one thing you lack, and it's something that's a bar to enough to a prosecution, and that's you don't have a body. And without having a body, you can't go into court and say Fiona was murdered. We saw that with Sandra Collins over in the west of Ireland, where there was a prosecution taken, but it failed, and that was one of the grounds for failing. There was only in this jurisdiction. There's only been one case solved, where it went to court and people were charged and convicted, where a person went missing and no body was found, and that was in the case of Captain Robert Myrick. the English officer who went abducted up north and murdered down south. But that is the only case.
Can time work in favour of investigators, where relationships end and loyalties change, and people who were frightened maybe at 25 may not be frightened at 55?
Absolutely. And some years after the Operation Trace was set up, I was appointed as sergeant in charge of this. There's a new Garda cold case unit, kind of loosely based on Operation Trace, where we undertook the investigation of over 200 unsolved murders. And it's the one thing that was the most prominent features we discovered early on, was that all these loyalties that be grown out of love or fear or any other reason, the years do change them. And where I might have covered for someone for so many years out of a sense of loyalty or fear or respect or whatever, years will change that. And as I say, it's been 30 years now with Fiona, and with Fiona's unborn child. There are people out there, not just only the main culprit, but there are others out there who know exactly what happened. And they owe to the society around it and Fiona's friends and Fiona's family to tell the truth.
And given the lack of physical evidence, is it more likely to be that somebody does eventually come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle, rather than science and the extraordinary developments in DNA and other forensics cracking this?
Yeah, well, without a body or a crime scene, and we don't possess either when you think about it, it's very difficult to have the science to have an input in that. But to the body discovered or something, well, that's a different story. But at the moment, you're dependent almost entirely on somebody's conscience, somebody's goodwill, somebody deciding that enough's enough. I've covered this for long enough. It's time that to come forward.
Alan, you investigated Fiona's disappearance alongside those of Jojo Dullard, Deirdre Jacob, Ciara Breen, Fiona Sinnott and Annie McCarrick. And there was a media term used for a while, the vanishing triangle. But did Operation Trace ever find convincing evidence that one single person was responsible for all of those women disappearing?
No, as I say, we're quite satisfied that in at least 3 of the cases, that's Fiona Pender, Fiona Sinnott and Ciara Breen, the culprit was known to the girls who went missing. The other cases, we never established definitively who was involved, but to say that all cases were the work of any one individual is not correct.
So that was a bit of a misnomer. Geographic factors linked them, but that's was about it.
Yeah. And I suppose the fact is, we say there's a similarity as far as Annie McCarrick was on the open road, Jojo Dullard was on the open road, little things like that. And I suppose a rough geographical area.
I read a very striking quote from you about Fiona's case, where you said, "I personally felt I failed the families." Why do you carry that?
Absolutely, because, well, we were tasked with investigating this case, solving the case, and we failed to do so. I was 13 years appointed and operated as national coordinator for Operation Trace for 13 years, and in that 13 years, I was unable to bring Fiona home. So it's a failure I have to live with, and my colleagues and I have to live with also.
But can you reconcile that with, there's only so far a detective can go if the evidence doesn't take them, and particularly when you have no body and no crime scene?
Exactly, and the one thing you're saying to yourself is that to keep the pros like yourself this morning, keeping the case out there in the public domain is the most important thing we can do now. That's why I sat down and wrote a book about the missing females, because it needs publicity, it needs people knowing what went on and knowing, 30 years is a long time. But that should not be forgotten.
No. Well, more than 50 people gathered beside Fiona's memorial in Tullamore at the weekend.
And I thought it was a lovely tribute to see that happen. I really did.
The tragedy, of course, is that her parents never got the answer they desperately wanted.
That's the problem. That is the problem. And Fiona's family were a family risen with grief and an awful lot of tragedy in the family as well, you know.
Well, if there is a person listening who can finally give us that last clue, maybe they're frightened, maybe they don't know what would happen next if they finally speak.
Yeah.
What would likely be the outcome?
Well, in the court cases we were investigating, I always told people it's never ever hold back and give it evidence because you fear what's going to be said about you. You're not going to be censured. I mean, people know we all live with pressures and we all live under influence of different people. We all know that. It's keeping it hidden from the public is a bigger sin, if you know what I mean, rather than come out and say it. There's nobody going to judge you.
Well, I'm grateful for your time, Alan, and thank you very much for making time for us today and for the call, and we will talk again.
We will, and I would hope that the next time we're talking it'll be some good news for the owner's friends and family.
Some closure at last, perhaps.
Alan,
take care.
Okay, you take care. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Alan Bailey is a retired Garda detective who reinvestigated cold cases of women who went missing in different parts of Leinster, and as he said, certainly in a number of them, 3 of them at least, they were unrelated, unconnected, and Fiona Pender is one that obviously assumes a particular poignancy now as the 30th anniversary of her disappearance has just passed. It's 25 to 12.
Have your say. Call the Midlands Today Show now. 0818 300 103.
Midlands 103.
Now, when you think of burnout, you might see in your profession that there are 1 or 2 people around the office, perhaps, who from time to time look as if they've had far too much on their plate. But when 4 out of 5 colleagues are saying, "Oh, I've had enough. I don't have enough time to catch my breath," well, you begin to wonder, is the job itself structured in a way that simply isn't healthy? Dr. Damien Burke has co-authored a report which looks at the hours that school principals must devote to their occupation. Damien, you're very welcome to the programme. Good morning.
Thanks, Will. Good morning to you and your listeners.
So this is a fairly big sample, 900 principals contributing their experiences. So what questions did you pose?
Well, we'll just to maybe give some background to your listeners. This research was carried out by myself and colleagues from DC Create Research Centre, Dr. Sabrina Fitzsimons, Professor Catherine Furlong, Dr. P. O'Farrell and myself. And ultimately, we wanted to get a sense, Will, of school principals' experiences of occupational stress and burnout. And as you flagged for us, we surveyed over 900 primary and post-primary school principals across the Republic of Ireland, which is a fair chunk. It's mixed methods research, which means we used a burnout inventory in order for the participants to raise their level of burnout if that was present, alongside a researcher-designed questionnaire. And then obviously we followed up with interviews for 17 of the participants just to get a little bit of depth behind the figures, as it were. And I suppose, Will, just before we get into the headline findings, which you probably want to talk about, a really important thing to say at the outset is that this study, and myself and my colleagues, we're not saying that principals no longer want to lead schools. Actually, it's quite the opposite. What comes through really strongly is their commitment to education, but also the growing difficulty of finding time and space to actually lead teaching and learning. And we can all probably remember from school that phrase, that Irish phrase, "Príomh Ide," meaning principal, but the literal translation of that, Will, as you know and your listeners will know, means lead teacher or head teacher. And what we're finding is, and what we're saying today, is that principals aren't getting the opportunity to actually lead teaching and learning in their schools. They want to lead teaching and learning in their schools. It's the reason why they came into the role, but there are systemic factors that are preventing that. And also, Will, just to say, this isn't new, what we're pointing to today. It is a landmark study in terms of the very high number of participants that we have. The ICPN, the Irish Primary Principals Network, as far back as 2022, the ASTI in 2025, the National Principal Forum in 2025, and the NAPD, which is post-primary principals and deputy principals. They've all been shining a light on this. So we hope this kind of cumulative data that we're all gathering is going to get attention from policyholders.
Just one other point on the methodology. So are we talking about somebody who's tired and frustrated at the end of a difficult term, or is it something more sustained? In other words, what was the timing of when you asked them?
Yeah, that's a fair point, Will. So we carried out the research this year in 2026 from January through to March. So we tried to get a real-time data. And I suppose the definition of burnout might be really important, Will, in terms of context. So the WHO, which we can all agree a very reputable agency, they say that it's emotional exhaustion, it's depersonalization, and it's reduced personal accomplishment. And like you said in your intro, we can all have a bad day. And we can all have, kind of an incident that happens during our day, and it might colour the way that we're feeling. But what we're finding in terms of this study on burnout is this is repeated. This is day on day. This is week on week. And we all of us understand how important the work of schools are. But within that organisation, and it is an organisation, a very complex one, principals are obviously, they're leading the school. And if their capacity to lead the school and lead the teach and learn agenda of the school is compromised through no fault of their own, that obviously has serious consequences and serious knock-on consequences that society needs to take regard of.
So let's talk about this 50-hour week, because the majority of respondents are saying that's the order of work they're doing, and in some cases more. So what's filling those additional hours?
Yeah, so like 56% of participants said they work more than 51 hours a week. But also then, just to kind of go a step further, Will, on that, 1 in 10 of the principals were saying that they work 65 hours plus per week. 7 out of 10 of the participants were saying that they couldn't avail of their annual leave entitlements. And I mean, that's concerning in its own right, but kind of to develop the point a little bit further, if you're not availing of your annual leave, whether you work in radio or you work in university or you work in school, it means you're not getting that downtime to decompress, to rejuvenate, or reboost your energy levels, and then you're coming back to school after the weekend or the holiday or whatever the case might be, and you're just as tired as the day that you took your annual leave. So that's a real threat. But to kind of address your question specifically, the contributory factors, we asked participants, what was causing this? And remember, 86% of the principals surveyed reported moderate to high work-related burnout. That's quite a staggering figure, 86%. They talked about workload, the sheer volume of work, Will, that principals were expected to do, and it became really obvious to us that schools, that the principal is like the Swiss Army knife at the school, in the sense that, they can be handling the mundane of, is the heating system working in the school on a Monday morning, and then an hour or so later they might be chairing a meeting with, an psychologist, with a class teacher, with a parent, with an OT, that's trying to design a learning program for a child with complex special education needs, and then everything in between. The challenge,
if I can just challenge that slightly, that every senior management job will involve some additional paperwork, personnel issues, logistical challenges, balancing budgets, difficult decisions, and so on. So where is the line between genuinely unreasonable workload and something that's par for the course?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Will. I suppose what we're hearing in our research is the principals are saying that their days are being dominated by HR management, facilities management, the building, being a crisis responder, finance, procurement. So I take your point that, there is an element of that to, senior management. But what these principals are saying that, they sought to be principals because they wanted to influence the teaching and learning agenda of their schools. They were teachers themselves, sometimes in their own school, sometimes in another school. And they're being frustrated by this accumulation of tasks that I've talked about, that's expanding at an exponential rate, a relentless volume of work, constant change in the system, and then the emotional demands of the job as well. So principals are saying to us, they're constantly switched on. Even when they go home, there's spillage from, challenges at work into home life, and then that's manifesting itself in physical symptoms of excessive tiredness, sleep disturbance, depleted energy, susceptibility to illness, and then obviously that has cognitive and psychological symptoms in the long run.
But do they not have deputies and staff who have posts of responsibility to whom they can delegate some of this work?
That's true. They absolutely do, Will. And just to say, we did ask the principals about protective factors, because this can't be just all doom and gloom. And there are many protective factors that they are drawing upon. And they were very quick to talk about the support and positive connection with the school leadership team. But I think, bar perhaps the principal, the secretary and the caretaker in every school, every other staff member is actually pupil-facing. So in your typical primary school in the Midlands, the deputy principal has a teaching role, whether that's in mainstream or in special education. The assistant principals that you talked about, that middle management here, they are all teaching as well during the day from 9 till 3, whatever the case might be. So in terms of real-time responding to these myriad of duties and tasks that I talked about, it's still ultimately the principal and a very small admin team that's responding to them. So by all means, we want to encourage middle management, but I think we need to consider, are they actually getting the time themselves in order to make an impact in school, which will lessen the burden on the principal ultimately in the end.
Around 1 in 5 say they're unlikely to remain in their role over the coming year. Now, intention and actually resigning are two very different things. Do you believe that?
Well, we take all our respondents, as being sincere in what they're saying, because, these are important things when people talk about their own mental health and, their own career prospects. So I think the fact that people are thinking that way, the fact that people have that ideation is in itself a concerning feature. And we presume that, they may well go through with it. But it's the loss of the system that I think, Will, is the issue. So, and I'm sure your listeners will know about the retention issues for teachers, recruiting teachers, attracting them to our schools and then keeping them in the schools. And we're seeing that same phenomenon now actually play out amongst principals. And that point that I made at the very beginning about how important your principal is to their school community, if that position in a school is chopping and changing, every 2 or 3 years, it has a destabilising influence, obviously, on the school, and that's kind of played across a number of years. So I think the fact that, principals are thinking that way, and that 2 out of 10, talked about likely or very likely to leave in the next 12 months, I think that is a wake-up call to perhaps make systemic changes in the system to make sure that that figure actually isn't realised in real time in subsequent years.
So if the Minister for Education was listening today and asked, what do you want me to do? Is it more deputies? Is it fewer department initiatives? Is it a formal job description that limits what principals are expected to do? Is there any single reform that would make the biggest difference?
Yeah, and I think in fairness to the Minister and Department of Education, they're quite aware of these issues, and there are small incremental improvements in the system to try and address these. So everyone is coming to this with good intention. I think maybe we should just listen to the principals themselves, what they told us in terms of solutions. And the first thing, and you're playing your part here today, Will, they want a conversation about this. This isn't something that can be kept quiet and hushed. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a real wake-up call for us when a principal puts up their hand and says, as close to 40% of our principals in sample said, I have poor mental health and burnout is actually affecting me in my work and in my role. So I think we need to reprioritise maybe how principals spend their time, like centralised kind of areas for management tasks like procurement would be really, really useful. And also the schools, have their own individual system for admin or for procurement or for HR or for finance. So maybe if there was a bundling together of that kind of service so that could be taken to a centralised area. And in fairness to the ETB schools, under the old VEC model, that's something that they're making good inroads into. You mentioned about more middle management opportunities, and I'm certainly not going to say that that's not a good thing. It is a really important thing, but we just need to be cognizant of the fact that ultimately the principal is accountable. As per the Education Act 1998, they are accountable for everything that happens in their school, and giving them more support, which can only kick in after contact time or after contact hours, that will have a limited reach. I suppose we might like to see more release time, perhaps for deputy principals in primary, more release time for them during the week would be useful, and in post-primary maybe considering going beyond quote in terms of maybe 1, 2 or 3 walking deputy principals. The mental health supports for principals, there is an employee assistance service. It's a really good service for the education sector. Principals were saying to us they might like to see it a little bit more tweaked and focused towards principals and their specific needs. And that's not us putting principals up on a pedestal. It's just saying that the needs of principals as opposed to teachers are slightly different. They do have common features, but they are slightly different. I think ultimately, though, Will, principals want to lead, teach and learn in their school. That's why they went into the role. That's why they were recruited for the role. That was the criteria upon which they were chosen for the role. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we want our principals to be doing? Do we want them filling in forms? Do we want them filling in spreadsheets? Do we want them, kind of getting burdened with that kind of work? Or do we actually want them to make an impact on the teaching and learning programme in their school and empower their teachers to deliver really effective curriculum for our children, which is ultimately what we want to happen in our schools?
Well, certainly the conversation will continue, and I'm grateful for you taking the time to tell us about your research. So, Dr. Damien Burke, thanks for the call. Thanks very much, Will. Good to talk to you and your listeners. Thank you. Damien is from DCU's School of Policy and Practice. It's 10 to 12.
Love the Midlands? Love Midlands Today. Midlands 103.
A listener who works in an emergency department as a nurse says, "You will never know the pressure that life and death decisions will actually bring to bear. And while I respect principals and I know the hours are long, they do not know burnout in the way that medical staff know burnout." And I suppose all stresses are relative, aren't they? It's what you're used to. And one person's stress might be another person's holiday. And in the case of medical staff, I know it's a job I couldn't do. But I also know I couldn't be a school principal either, or even a teacher, to have the patience and to deal with the responsibility that brings. So it's a conversation that not everybody will agree with, but let's see where it leads. Will, I'm disappointed there are so few jobs linked to the renovated power station. One person perhaps required to press a green button for on and another to press a red button for off. It doesn't sound very encouraging. That's from Jim in Shannon Bridge. Well, West Offaly is where we will be on the programme this time tomorrow, because with thanks to the news reporting scheme, we get into the small communities that we don't otherwise really get to visit very often. So tomorrow, Cloughan is where you will find us between 9 and 12, and I do hope to see you there. Thank you to Sinead, who put it all together, to Radic for engineering, to all of our guests, and most of all, thank you for listening. I'll leave you with Paolo Nutini.